the things that we cherish, those of us who believe in things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and so on, those are the results of like collective struggles of solidarity that have taken place over centuries. That gives me hope that collectively we will survive what we're going through right now, if we do what our forebears have done.
A lot of your writing draws from like a coming of age experience as a Vietnamese American man. Being a son and a student is a big theme in a lot of your work, but now you're a professor and a father yourself. So I guess for the young people who are coming of age now in historically unprecedented times, so for people like me with two Trump presidencies, a pandemic, a genocide in Palestine, what advice would you offer us?
We look at the history of the United States and what has been done to like Black people and indigenous peoples and the kinds of warfare that the U.S. is engaged in, it helps to know that, because then we know that we've survived collectively all these kinds of things. That doesn't alleviate the dangers that we face as individuals today, but it gives us a lesson, which is that the things that we cherish, those of us who believe in things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and so on, those are the results of like collective struggles of solidarity that have taken place over centuries. That gives me hope that collectively we will survive what we're going through right now, if we do what our forebears have done, which is to refuse to be divided, to seek constantly solidarity, to recognize that people have been through this and survived, to recognize the real perils that we face, but also to recognize the real possibilities in resistance and community.
The anti-colonial struggle has always been, even in the past, a pretty scary thing to say. I read another interview in which you discussed MLK's most radical speech being on Vietnam and pointed out that the speech is generally pretty erased, and he was also assassinated a year later. And we're seeing a lot of retaliation against people speaking out. I'm curious, have you ever felt personal fear in transgressing some of the oldest presumed boundaries about like what is okay to say in American liberal discourse?
My personal war, the Vietnam War, is now regarded as a historical war, as something that's taken so far in the past. It's ancient history for people like your generation, for example, that it's not really not that threatening to speak up about that history and the Vietnam War. But connecting the Vietnam War to other wars and to other experiences, now that's threatening. And again, that's exactly why I think the Martin Luther King Jr. speech in Beyond Vietnam was threatening, because he was transgressing the boundaries that were put on him. You know, like if you're a Black man, you get to talk about Black rights. But you should not be talking about the war in Vietnam. That's exactly the situation we're faced with today. You can talk about your civil rights, you can talk about your particular identities, but to connect those to the larger operations of American empire, like our support for Israel and its form of settler colonialism, that's connecting the dots in a way that structural power doesn't want you to connect. And when I say structural power, I don't mean just the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party as well. So yes, I think learning to speak up for Palestine and to become affiliated with the Palestinian cause in my own minor way, and speaking out against what I think of as a genocide, that did draw a retribution greater than anything I'd experienced before. Whether or not we have a political consciousness, we might be subjected to these forms of persecution is such a reality that I feel that so intensely, given the work that I do and the histories that I know. And so, yes, I do feel trepidation, but I also feel that because I have an awareness about that, that it's beholden on me to speak out, because the burden should not be on the younger people or on students. I mean, the burden really should be on the people who, like older people like myself, who at least have more resources to try to weather any kind of storm that comes our way.
Something I've thought a lot about with the Palestine issue is that it is to many people a distinctly racialized issue, highlighting that for people who live and grew up outside a Western context, Palestine is being viewed as a colonial struggle, with colonialism as like the biggest unhealed wound. And you've been writing about colonialism for a long time. Do you see the narrative shifting here? What does it mean when colonialism returns to the foreground of discourse?
I've moved from someone who came into political consciousness as an Asian American and was therefore invested in Asian American causes, especially around, rights, identities, recognitions, the causes of migration, immigration, diaspora, and things like this, which were really framed around an issue of anti-racism and access to the United States and belonging to this country. I've gone from that position over the last couple of decades to being someone who sees all those things as really subsidiary to a greater cause of decolonization. I think we're living in a very long history of struggling to get rid of the structures and the legacies and the realities of colonization, which took half a millennia to build up. It's going to take a long time to take it apart. But if we recognize that the political struggles that we're engaging in should be political struggles around the cause of decolonization, then we can recognize how these seemingly disparate identities and histories are actually really connected, and why pointing to Palestine or pointing to Gaza and pointing to Israeli occupation and apartheid and genocide and naming those things as such is connecting all of that to this longer history of colonialism in which we're all embedded. And that's why it's threatening to connect, the causes of civil rights and minority empowerment and things like this in the United States to the cause of anti-genocide and pro-Palestinian advocacy, because it reveals how colonization deploys all of these things in order to exploit us and to separate us. That has been empowering for me to make this transformative journey. And I think one of the reasons why it's empowering is because my political consciousness has expanded, my understanding of myself and my political causes has expanded, and it makes one realize that wedding oneself to one particular political cause, especially around one's identity, can be really empowering, but also limiting in the long run, which is why there are perils to such things as identity politics. There are perils to revolutionary movements becoming static and becoming oppressive in their own way. And the way we inoculate ourselves against that is to constantly understand that we're in a web of relationships where we need to keep up these connections of solidarity. And we need to realize that sometimes we are disempowered and exploited, and other times we might be in the cause of power, which is why, again, the issue of Gaza and Palestine is so unsettling, because many people are being forced to realize, well, they might be disempowered as so-called minorities in the West, and yet they are also a part of an imperial machinery that exploits and oppresses Palestine.
I'm curious what you hope literature will look like in response to current events, both conceptually and formally. Like, we saw literature changed a lot and was written in response to the first Trump presidency. That was like the literary moment I guess I started reading in. I'm curious, what were some of your takeaways from that literary moment, and how do you feel that writers should respond maybe differently or similarly this time around?
Oh, I think before the first Trump presidency, we were witnessing a moment in the United States where there was this kind of optimism on the liberal side of things, that multiculturalism had triumphed, and the importance of diverse storytelling had been established. We look back upon American history and we realize it's not a white Christian nationalist nation. It's also a very diverse nation, and we need diverse storytelling. And the apotheosis of that, obviously, was the Obama administration. And the subsequent years after the Obama administration, going through Trump and then Biden, and hopefully has made people realize that liberalism and multiculturalism and their related forms of storytelling are important, but they can also be completely in the service of settler colonialism and imperialism as well. President Obama, very likable gentleman, I'm sure, I think, but also someone who authorized enormous numbers of drone strikes, increased the imperial power of the presidency, deported enormous numbers of people. So there's a continuity between Democratic and Republican administrations, and the differences we shouldn't minimize, but there's a continuity because they're invested in the global hegemony of American power. And multiculturalism and liberalism are invested in the global hegemony of American power too. And so if there's a shift in the literary landscape after Trump and during and after genocide, I hope it's a recognition that simply telling diverse stories isn't going to be enough. I mean, they're necessary, but is the price of diversity going to be inclusion in imperialism? I hope that's a problem that contemporary literature, especially literature written by people of color, queer people, trans people, anybody who identifies in some way as a minority, I hope these writers are able to grapple with a fundamental contradiction. What does it mean to want to belong to an empire? That's such an enormous ethical, political, moral, aesthetic challenge that I think it should be invigorating for contemporary literature.
So I would love to talk a little bit about the tools of writing itself, which is, I guess, the focus of your lecture series. What does it mean to you to write with what you so beautifully called like a capacious grief? How, for example, could like a young Asian American who's not Palestinian write about Palestine without it being presumptuous?
The notion of capacious grief comes out from the possibility of feeling grief to begin with. I think that for me, the book is mostly about literature and so on, but also about my personal relationship to literature and how that was shaped out of my refugee experiences and growing up with my parents who were also refugees in a very difficult time for them, but also for the country. And me being, me recognizing that those experiences had prevented me from feeling grief. I think that we can talk about all these political issues in broad theoretical and historical ways, which is very important. But the way that people experience historical trauma is through their own emotions. And I like to say that history ripples through us, through our emotions, which means that a lot of people are really messed up by these histories of settler colonialism and war and migration and the refugee experience and all that, all those kinds of things. And for me, the personal consequences were that I was numb to myself. That's how I survived. And other people react in different ways emotionally. So for me to be able to even to learn how to feel was crucial for me as a human being, as a son, as a father, but also crucial for me as a writer, because I don't think anyone can be a very good writer if they can't feel, if they can't give in to their emotions. And a lot of people, I think, are not good at dealing with their emotions for many complicated reasons. But learning how to feel grief for what my family had been through, what my parents had been through, for the people we had left behind was enormously important to me. But what was also important was this idea of capacious grief, this idea that our grief is not singular. Now, when we've been devastated by history in some way, it's very tempting and it's very normal for us to feel that we're the only victims in the world, and that what happened to us is absolutely unique, and nothing else has been more devastating than what has happened to our people. And I think in most cases, that's simply not true. It's kind of depressing to look back on history, even to look at the present and realize, well, our grief is terrible, but those people's griefs are terrible. Those people's calamities are terrible, maybe even worse than ours. And to be able to recognize that is part of what it means to have capacious grief, to understand other people's grief and not just our own. Because if we only understand our own grief, we turn ourselves purely into victims. And unfortunately, the line between victim and victimizer is really thin. We saw that after 9/11. The United States felt victimized, got the world's sympathy. And what did the United States do? Turn around and just bomb a whole lot of people in Iraq and Afghanistan and cause the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Victims who are focused purely on their own grief, but don't have the capacity for capacious grief to see and empathize with the pain of others and also recognize that they themselves can cause that pain. Those people are actually very dangerous people. So I think capacious grief is absolutely necessary for any cause of solidarity and liberation and any cause that's committed against war and genocide.
I guess to end with a more hopeful question, you write a lot about otherness, and I guess to me the corollary to that is belonging, which, as you urged, can come from building community and I guess like expansive or unexpected ways. So I'm curious, what are the places that you in your life have found belonging, especially recently? And are there spaces where you feel that you have successfully managed to create belonging, like across difference?
When October 7th happened and all this violence ensued, it was not a political cause, the Palestinian cause that I'd been very active with before. I'd signed the BDS statement in around 2015 or 2016, but I hadn't been very active in the Palestinian cause. And then I spoke out after October 7th simply as an expression of my own political convictions. And then there was some controversy around some of the things that I said, and I'm sure certain invitations were rescinded and all of that. But it felt to me that as much as I might have lost in that respect, as much as, I might have lost some friends or some allies or some opportunities, a whole other world opened up as well, which is a world, a different kind of belonging, where people committed not just to Palestine, but to global anti-colonialism. And that to me was such a beautiful trade-off. I would do it again without hesitation. And so the question of belonging, we shouldn't limit it simply to what would I lose if I did a certain thing, right? Because you might lose something, but what could I gain as well if I was true to my convictions? And I think that was the consequence for me becoming more vocal on the Palestinian cause. Helped me grow as a writer and as a thinker, to grapple with issues that I had not thought about as deeply as I should have before then. And if we start to understand that our belonging might sometimes be ethically and politically complicated, then hopefully that will help us grapple with who we are, and that will express itself in our writing as well. But then finally, to end on a very happy note and possibly a sentimental and sappy note, I became a father, and I try to say this in as unsentimental of a way as possible because I don't think everybody should be a parent.
Mm.
I think there are a lot of people who should not be parents, but the problem is we don't know for sure until they actually become parents and start messing up their kids. And I was like, I don't want to be that kind of a person. But I became a father, and so far my kids seem to be pretty happy with me. And I'm discovering, or I have discovered, all kinds of emotional depths to myself uh, that I didn't realize I had before. A greater capacity for grief because I have a greater capacity for love as well.
For sure.
And if I've never felt at home in certain kinds of geographical places, or if I've never felt completely at home in the United States, I know I feel completely at home with my family. And, we should all have that opportunity to form our own kin in our own communities. And hopefully it's our biological family. But if it's not our biological family, then it should be other kinds of family, kinship around identity, affiliations,
Yeah.
political commitments, emotional commitments. And that's the greatest belonging that we can form, I think. And these larger abstractions of cultural nations and things like that they're so important, but so is the interpersonal.
Mhm.
And we should be taking care of each other with the people that we're closest to as well.